What is up, Canada? Matt McKeever here, and today we're going to be talking about some Canadian real estate news, and in particular, we're going to be diving into maybe what we can expect coming into 2022 from a rules, regulation, and taxation perspective. So, if you guys haven't been paying attention on my social media feeds, I was recently sharing a couple different articles related to some proposed changes from CMHC. Better Dwelling also had a article come out in regards to maybe some changes to some of the rules, regulations, and taxes that the federal Liberal Party may be proposing. As well, we're going to touch upon some changes to CMHC mortgages when it comes to bigger properties, apartment buildings. So that's what we're going to be diving into on today's show. We're going to be trying to go live every Monday. So if you guys are enjoying these live Monday news updates or kind of stream of consciousness from me, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. And otherwise, I guess we'll just jump right into it. So I'm going to pull up my screen here guys. And the first article we're going to be discussing here is going to be relating to a Better Dwelling article, essentially just hitting upon Canadian real estate investors to be hit with taxes, a lot of them. So what we're going to cover here right now isn't 100% set in stone, but it potentially shows us the direction the government may be heading towards. And this is showing up really strange on my screen share. All right, let me just see if I can get that fixed for you guys. That is really weird. But okay, we'll undo that. Maybe we'll undo these highlights and see if that works better. Remove all. All right. Okay. So jumping into it, essentially what I wanted to hit upon here was the excessive rent surplus. So a lot of you guys have probably discovered my channel through the BRRRR investment strategy, right? The concept of buy, renovate, rent, refinance, and repeat. And this is really the business model I use to build out my own real estate portfolio. And it's a strategy that I've shared and recommended to pretty much everyone that's ever interested in hearing me talk about real estate investing. And so building upon that, essentially one of the concerns that I have towards the strategy, again, we don't have a lot of details in regards to exactly how this may play out, is this idea of excessive rent surpluses. So the Income Tax Act will be amended to require landlords to disclose rent pre and post renovation. If a minimal renovation was executed and the rent surges, you might be hit with a tax to reduce profit. If executed, landlords might reconsider those renovictions. So in theory, what the government's trying to do here is try and curtail the concept of renovictions, which is the idea of evicting the tenant, going in and renovating it, so then you could essentially increase the rent price. Now, while this strategy may make BRRRR investing and certain, strategies of investors less profitable, it's not actually going to do anything to affordability. It may provide a little bit more security for the average tenant, particularly if they're sitting in an outdated unit that they've been in for years or decades, but it's highly unlikely that we're going to really see this move the needle in any meaningful manner. And I think it's actually only going to end up applying to edge case scenarios. Now, if they end up coming in with really strong regulations in this regard, like if they decide to really go after landlords on this, what's going to end up happening is you're just going to find landlords are going to be very disincentivized to fix up properties until they get a natural tenant turnover where a tenant decides to move out for whatever reason. And again, this will, potentially impact BRRRR investors. But again, the devil's in the details here. So until we really understand what they mean by, the scope of the renovations necessary and what's considered, a excessive increase in rent, it's going to be really hard for us to really get into the details on this until we got those details. But the next one was the anti-flipping tax on residential properties. So if you're planning on flipping a property for less than 12 months, you might have to pay an anti-flipping tax. Flippers might be a small segment, but they reduce liquidity and replace it with a higher price unit. At least that's the argument that the average voter is likely to buy if you're a federal politician trying to, show that you're fighting the good fight and trying to make real estate more affordable. Now, again, I don't think that this is going to have the actual intended consequences. I think it's going to end up just creating a bunch of unintended consequences. So if you end up creating some sort of restriction, like you need to own the property for a year or you need to own the property for 2 years, we're probably just going to see a lot of slow flips come into play. And this is even something we sort of see to a lesser extent. And now what I'm going to explain here, not recommending anyone do it, but you definitely do see it happen in the real estate investing world where people pretend to move into a property so they can get the capital gains exemption for principal residence, right? This is often the case in brand new subdivisions where, different people will pool their money, they'll buy the property, they'll hold it for a year or two, one, avoiding the HST cost, and then two, essentially going to resell it and trying to avoid any capital gains tax on it by claiming it was their principal residence. Sometimes they do it under the table in regards to how they get paid rent. Other times people are just really lazy and they literally are just hoping that, the Canadian government, that CRA won't catch them. Again, not recommending you do that, but I expect that we're going to see similar workarounds creep into the market if an anti-flipping tax was to be implemented. As well, it's important to understand that, flippers, real estate investors that are going into a property, fixing it up, turning around and reselling it, they're still going to demand the same profit margin. So one of two things is going to happen. Either flippers are going to buy less properties, or they're simply going to demand greater margins on their profits in order to be able to justify paying that excessive or that anti-flipping tax. So again, you guys kind of know my political bent here already. I don't really favor government intervention in pretty much any scenario, let alone when it comes to real estate investing. There's a lot of unintended consequences that are likely to roll out of this. And again, while this may be a pain in the ass factor for people with active flips on the go and active timelines, because again, this may create a pinch in regards to active projects, I really expect that we'd see the market adapt to it relatively quickly, and new and novel strategies will come up in order to essentially work around this. Again, we'll have to see exactly how they go about approaching this, what sorts of timelines are implemented and things of that nature in regards to how long do you hold the property before you're no longer considered a flipper? And, one of the arguments here is that essentially flipping can be used for money laundering. Now, that absolutely is true. We've touched upon it in previous videos. There was, in fact, an entire video series I did breaking down one of Jay-Z's songs where essentially he was recommending to people, launder your money through real estate investing. And again, I kind of explained the high-level concept in that. Now, do I expect that if they implement this anti-flipping tax on residential properties that will stop money laundering? No. In fact, a lot of money launderers would probably still prefer to go that route, even if it ends up cutting into their margins to a certain extent, because they still want to clean their money. So bad guys are still going to do bad things. And I don't think that this is going to, again, create a wave of affordability for the average Canadian. And even when you add up all these different proposed measures, again, it just doesn't feel like it's going to move the needle. It might make people feel good. It might make for a couple of good CBC news articles, but it's really just not going to change what's going on, right? We've talked about this in the past, but essentially it's monetary policy that's really driving all these unintended consequences, that's really causing the perversion in the Canadian real estate market from an affordability standpoint. Until we really fix the money supply, we're essentially just chasing our tail with these random rules and regulations that may penalize some edge cases, may penalize certain actors in the market, but isn't going to actually make a significant difference all in all. The next one was reviewing tax incentives for real estate investment trusts. So this one's a little bit more aimed at REITs. Less likely it's going to impact the average viewer of this channel, but the investment trust to hold real estate and generate income through rent, they aren't taxed on the income or gains made, making them tax efficient entities. REIT holders pay taxes on the disbursements from the REIT, but those can be deferred or reduced by registered accounts. This has made them extremely attractive over the past few years. Again, we've definitely seen lots of capital allocated into REITs. But again, when we see the government creating these loose monetary policies, really low interest rates environments, trying to change some of these tax incentives on REITs still isn't going to actually really address the underlying issues that are systemic throughout our entire Canadian economy. So scrolling down here a little bit further, the other piece I wanted to just hit upon with you guys, and again, I'll throw a comment after we post this video with links to all these articles so you guys can dive in and do your own research. But then they also want to start reviewing investor down payment requirements. So investors might soon need more for a down payment, limiting leverage. This is a move that other countries have recently adopted, including New Zealand. Now, again, while it will have a short-term impact, what you're going to end up seeing is a lot of workarounds from the average investor where they're going to go borrow hard money in order to supplement their down payment. And again, a lot of people will probably just be pushed into alternative financing outside of the existing banking system. I don't think that this is going to really stop real estate investors. In fact, this will likely just be something similar to what we've talked about in the past, the 5 mortgage limit, where it'll stop retail investors, right? Brand new retail investors will probably be stymied by a rule change like this. But your average sophisticated investor, they're going to find workarounds. They've already got easy access to cheap capital because, again, our monetary policies are creating the cheap capital that they're using to become real estate investors. The next one was a temporary ban on foreign buyers. So the ban would apply only to non-recreational residential property. Canada doesn't track beneficial ownership or confirm the info when it does. If it doesn't know who the beneficial owner is, it has no idea who owns the home. This is mostly window dressing. 100% agree with that assessment from Better Dwelling, because again, essentially what this is going to be is they're just going to find workarounds, right? They're going to find a patsy to put their name on the property that is a Canadian resident, or they're going to classify the property they're buying as recreational instead of investment. And again, it's really just not going to end up impacting anyone. But for a politician doing a stump speech, they'll be able to say, we're cracking down on foreign buyers that are making it unaffordable for the average Canadian family. Please don't look at our monetary or banking policies. Then looking at curbing excessive profits for investment properties. So this is really ambiguous. This is really ambiguously worded, and the directive doesn't elaborate. It only says they'll do so while also protecting small independent landlords. Again, this is suspect to me. If anything, I think it's going to be small independent landlords that aren't going to be able to afford complicated tax strategies in order to avoid whatever sort of curbing of excessive profits are brought in to try and make the market more affordable. These are all just band-aids on like a gunshot wound at this point in time. Until you fix the monetary supply in Canada, you're not going to be fixing what's going on here. So again, it just seems silly to me to even pretend that any of these measures that are currently being proposed are going to have any impact for affordability for the average Canadian. And again, that's essentially the point of all this, right? Moving on to the next story I wanted to cover with you guys. Essentially, we're just going to hit this quickly. Again, this is probably going to look a little quirky on the screen. I'm not going to fix it for now, but we'll make sure we get it fixed on future videos. But essentially, the idea here is there are changes being made from CMHC in regards to exactly how you can qualify and what sort of mortgages and mortgage insurance you can get from CMHC on your larger properties. So essentially, some of the key benefits that are being enacted here from the previous program include leverage. So for existing properties, maximum leverage has gone up to 95% loan to value from 85% loan to value. For new construction projects, leverage remains at 95% loan to cost. Amortization, so the maximum amortization allowed has been increased to 50 years from 40 years, and CMHC insurance premiums are being reduced. And insurance premiums have generally gone down, especially for properties with strong social outcomes. So essentially, the whole logic here is they're trying to incentivize landlords and real estate investors to rent out their properties at what's currently below fair market values. And if you do so, you're going to get some of these benefits, right, from your financing and things of that nature. Again, while the intentions here may be well, and there may even be edge case scenarios where it ends up actually helping someone, this isn't going to make a dramatic impact, right? We already talked about monetary policy, but if I'm going to move on from monetary policy, the other factor to be aware of here is, looks like I'm freezing a bit. But the other factor to be aware of here is essentially that this is only going to impact a handful of real estate investors. This isn't going to impact your average mom and pop investor who's buying small family dwellings and things of that nature. It's only going to be purpose-built apartment buildings and things of that nature. And again, there's not nearly enough of those being built. And a big part of that is the incentive to decide to condo those buildings, because again, when you condoize it or make it into a condominium, essentially we can either choose to sell the properties or rent them out, but it gives us a lot more flexibility. Just last point here from the renx.ca article is this impacts certain centers more than others because deeper rent discounts being required for centers such as Toronto, Vancouver, and Victoria. Again, that'll probably make it sound like a great concept. I'm less certain that this is actually going to play out the way they would like. But moving on from that, let's jump over to the CMHC funded report that proposed $1 million home surtaxes. Now, we're going to cover in a second a different article from BC where BC is essentially increasing the the rebate they have for property taxes on properties up to $2 million. But first, CMHC wants to implement a surtax essentially on $1 million plus homes. Now, again, this is one of those things that sounds great on paper because you're like, oh, we're going to tax the rich. Let's get all those rich SOBs that own $1 million homes. But if you've been paying attention at all to what's going on in the Canadian real estate market, almost everyone now owns $1 million home. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but in markets like the GTA or Vancouver, Victoria, nope, they actually, a lot of them do own $1 million homes. And again, this isn't people building massive mansions and we're only going to be taxing this rich. This is actually going to hit a lot of middle class income individuals, particularly if we continue to see home prices appreciate at 20, 30, 40% as we did in the last year or two. So again, this one actually in particular bothers me because it just is a terrible idea for a multitude of factors. Again, pretty soon, given another 2 or 3 years, and almost every piece of real estate at the current rate is going to end up being $1 million property. And this is just going to be one more tax grab where the money's going to go into a pot and disappear into the ether, in my opinion. But hey, maybe I'm just a little too black-pilled here. Well, let's quickly look at a few of the highlights here from this article. So a new proposal in the CMHC-backed report stops short of calling for that, but suggests homeowners pay a surtax on properties worth more than $1 million to help stall rising home prices. Now, one thing that I did kind of find funny is the report was by Generation Squeeze, so already kind of feels like they've got a certain narrative they're focused on, but essentially the concept here is owners with homes valued between 1 and 1.5 million would pay 0.2%. This is per annum. And the next bracket up to 2 million would pay 0.5%. Anything over 2 million owes 1%. So again, this definitely would have significant impacts in particularly, expensive neighborhoods, right? If you live in Oakville and you've got a single detached home, if you live in markets like even Mississauga or Milton, Scarborough, there's a good chance that you've got $1 million plus home and maybe you've been sitting on it for a few decades. Why should you really be penalized for owning your property and just sitting on it for decades? It makes no sense whatsoever. You already pay property taxes. You already pay income taxes. This is one more tax grab. And again, this is going to be used as the guise of trying to help affordability, but I'm not buying it. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. Let me know in the comment section what your thoughts are, but I'm very suspect whenever we see government problems or government solutions to fix government problems that were originally a derivative of a previous government solution. And that's essentially what we're dealing with here. So just as an example, a $1.2 million home would owe $400 a year, and a $1.5 million home would owe $1,000 a year under the proposed surtax. And again, this was a CMHC funded report. Now, is $1,000 going to break the bank for your average person that owns $1 million home? Probably not. Or a $1.5 million home? Probably not. However, I think what we do need to consider is who is it most likely to impact? The people it's most likely to impact are those that are on fixed incomes, that have lived in the property for an extended period of time. They're probably going to either get pushed into considering selling the property or get pushed into considering products like reverse mortgages in order to be able to access some of the surplus equity that's been created through the loose monetary policy over the last couple of decades. And so, again, I think this is particularly bad for seniors that live in, dense urban neighborhoods and expensive neighborhoods, things of that nature, because they might have been sitting on a property they bought, back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s for $100,000, a couple $100,000. It's now worth $1 million or more because of crazy monetary policy, nothing to do with what they personally chose to do, but now they're being taxed on that property as well. Now, without getting too into conspiracy theories, I think we all deep down know that apparently the real estate we own isn't really our real estate because, the government taxes us multiple ways on it, right? You can get taxed capital gains. If it's not your principal residence, you're paying property taxes. If you're charging rent or anything of that nature, again, you're paying income taxes on that income. But I couldn't help but just kind of laugh at the irony here that while the CMHC is proposing a surtax on $1 million plus homes, essentially in the exact opposite direction, the BC homeowner grant is now actually bumping it up the threshold to $1.975 million, which is up just over 20%. Sorry, I'm getting still used to some of my hotkeys here. But let's do this one more time. Okay, here we go. So essentially, yeah, you read that right. The threshold increased by a fifth last year. And what's really interesting is the logic behind why they decide to increase these thresholds isn't actually dictated based upon affordability or inflation or anything like that. It's actually just what the BC government feels like the average person needs, which is just interesting. And so essentially, what the net effect here is that you may save up to $770 in reduced property taxes based upon this new proposal being put forward. So, if you own a $2 million or just under a $2 million home in BC, you may be going to be able to save a little bit in property taxes, but CMHC is probably going to try and get you on the other side of it. So this is kind of the roundup of recent news and recent proposals from a regulation, tax, and all that sort of jazz perspective. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. Are there any other sort of news tidbits that you've noticed in the Canadian real estate world that you feel like we need to talk about or that you're concerned of as a real estate investor? Do you think I missed the mark on anything we talked about so far today? Let me know in that comment section down below. Otherwise, I'm going to see if I can get this to work and bring up the chat quick. But I appreciate those of you that are jumping in the chat. Hey, what's up, Alan? Hungarian Experiment. We've got Gary, Nathan, and Holden. Alan saying they can't see the forest for the trees. Most flippers create value for end user purchasers. 100% agree. Not everyone wants to buy a fixer-upper and invest their own money. Some people like the turnkey experience of just being able to move in easy. And again, if you've got an extra tax on flipping, because again, you get taxed on the income already, but there's an extra tax on it, that's still just going to get passed along to the end user, right? The flipper's not going to decide to lose money on all their future flips simply because the government implemented a tax. They're either going to take their ball with them and move on to a different investment strategy, or more likely, they're just going to find a way to be able to pass on those costs to the end user. Gary said, is the money printing already stopped? No, the money printing definitely is not stopped, and I don't see it in the foreseeable future. I think our government's addicted to cheap debt, easy monetary policies, right? And that's what kind of gives rise to the hedge funds that go in and buy up huge neighborhoods in the U.S., and you can probably look forward to that coming to a neighborhood near you soon in Canada. I just feel like they've got better things to do right now. But once those markets get completely priced out, it seems natural that you'll see people choose to enter the Canadian market and undertake a similar investment philosophy. Of course, assuming that all our real estate's not worth $1 million before they get around to doing it. Nathan saying, dude, government is insane, creates so many more problems when trying to help, so much inefficiency. Absolutely. I wouldn't want the government to fix essentially any of my problems. I certainly don't need them to find new problems of mine in order for them to try and create a solution either. But again, I'm a little bit biased. I'm a little bit of a libertarian, anarchist, ANCAP, whatever you want to kind of frame me as. I know those can mean different things to different people, but government solutions rarely end up actually solving any problem and end up just creating more bloat, more bureaucracy, and more overhead that ends up just costing all of us in the end. So again, that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspective. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I will post a comment to this video after it's done rendering, where I'll link to all the articles so you guys can go check out the source articles for yourself. But let me know what news articles, what perspectives do you want to talk about on next Monday's video. Otherwise, appreciate you guys hanging out with me on today's video, and we'll see you next Monday. Thanks, guys. Oh, that didn't work. Thank you. All right. Hopefully that ends now.